War is an algorithm. We will show its price. In Yemen, the cost of trucked water has risen more than 400% since the war began. In Gaza, daily water availability dropped to 3 liters per person, 1/12 of the UN emergency minimum. In Iraq, entire cities have gone without functioning water systems for years. Water is the least expensive resource on Earth in peacetime. In wartime, it becomes the most expensive, and destroying it costs a fraction of what rebuilding it takes. This is not a story about thirst. It is a story about the most cost-effective economic weapon available to any military force. Water infrastructure is cheap to destroy, expensive to rebuild, and its absence kills economies faster than almost any other target. We are going to calculate exactly what that looks like. The baseline: what water costs to destroy. A single airstrike on a desalination plant or pumping station costs between $250,000 and $2 million. The damage it produces can eliminate water supply to hundreds of thousands of people for months or years. Rebuilding a desalination plant costs $50 to $200 million and takes 18 to 36 months under normal conditions. Under wartime conditions, the timeline extends indefinitely, because the same infrastructure can be struck again before repairs are complete. The ratio is the same asymmetry we see in energy infrastructure warfare. But water carries an additional dimension that energy does not: biological. Without electricity, factories shut down. Without water, people die within days. The economic consequences are not deferred. They are immediate. Yemen, the most water-scarce country in the world, at war. Yemen was already the most water-poor country in the Arab world before 2015. Per capita water availability stood at just 85 cubic meters per year, 1/10 of the regional average and 1/100th of the global average. The internationally recognized threshold for water stress is 1,700 cubic meters per year. Yemen was already at 1/20th of that threshold before a single shot was fired in the current conflict. The war transformed a water crisis into a water emergency. According to Carnegie Endowment analysis, the destruction of water infrastructure has driven the cost of trucked water to more than 400% above pre-war levels. Over 14.5 million people now lack access to safe drinking water and sanitation. 80% of the population struggles to access water for basic needs. The economic mechanism is direct. Agriculture accounts for 90 to 95% of Yemen's water consumption. When water infrastructure is destroyed, agriculture collapses. When agriculture collapses, food production stops. When food production stops, the country must import food, which requires foreign currency that a wartime economy does not have. Over 17 million Yemenis now face acute food insecurity, according to UN reports. The water crisis and the food crisis are the same crisis. They said, water infrastructure is not a military target. International humanitarian law protects essential civilian infrastructure. They got documented airstrikes on desalination plants, water tanks, pumping stations, and pipelines across the country. Human Rights Watch documented systematic targeting of water infrastructure in Taiz. Both sides in the conflict have weaponized water. The Houthis by blocking water flow into government-controlled areas. The coalition by striking water facilities in Houthi-controlled zones. Water has become a strategic asset, not a civilian resource. The cholera outbreak that followed, one of the worst in recorded history, killed over 2,000 people between April and August 2017 alone. It was not caused by war directly. It was caused by the destruction of water and sanitation infrastructure that, once broken, could not be repaired fast enough to prevent contamination from spreading. Gaza, 3 liters per day. Gaza's water system was already under severe stress before October 2023. The coastal aquifer, the only local water source, has been contaminated by seawater intrusion and sewage leakage for decades. Desalination plants supplied roughly 90% of Gaza's drinking water. The system was fragile. It was dependent on electricity to run, and it was dependent on fuel imports to generate that electricity. The conflict destroyed it in weeks. By late April 2024, 63% of all water and sanitation infrastructure in Gaza had been significantly damaged or destroyed, according to the Palestinian Water Authority. Daily water production dropped to one-third of pre-war levels. The population was reduced to 3 liters per person per day, compared to the UN emergency minimum of 15 liters and the WHO recommended standard of 50 to 100 liters. The World Bank's February 2025 assessment placed total damages to Gaza's infrastructure at $18.5 billion, with water, sanitation, health, and education accounting for 19% of that total, roughly $3.5 billion, but the true cost extends far beyond infrastructure. Gaza's economy contracted by 83% in 2024. Almost all economic production has halted. The water system is not a cause of that collapse. It is one of its primary enablers. UNICEF calculated the immediate cost of meeting urgent water and sanitation needs in Gaza at $53.4 million. That figure is almost irrelevant compared to the long-term reconstruction bill. And it assumes that the infrastructure can be rebuilt, which requires not just funding, but cessation of hostilities, access for construction crews, and a functioning supply chain for specialized equipment. None of those conditions currently exist. The compounding biology. Water destruction compounds in ways that other infrastructure damage does not. Electricity can be restored with generators. Roads can be bypassed. But water contamination spreads. Sewage overflows into streets and groundwater. Waterborne diseases, cholera, hepatitis A, typhoid, spread through populations that have no functioning health system to treat them. Each day of contaminated water exposure produces new infections, new hospitalizations, and new deaths. In Gaza, untreated sewage has been flowing into the Mediterranean Sea at tens of millions of gallons per day since the conflict began. This contaminates the water intake of desalination plants downstream. It degrades the marine ecosystem. It creates a public health crisis that will persist for years after any ceasefire. The 26 million tons of debris in Gaza, much of it containing hazardous materials, unexploded ordnance, and chemical contamination, will take years to clear. During that time, it will continue to leach into groundwater. The World Bank estimates that at the 2007 to 2022 growth rate, it would take Gaza 350 years to restore GDP to its 2022 level. The water system is a primary reason why that timeline cannot be compressed. Iraq, the invisible infrastructure war. Iraq's water crisis predates the current century, but was dramatically accelerated by decades of conflict. The Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War, and the 2003 invasion each damaged water infrastructure. Sanctions between 1990 and 2003 prevented repairs. The UNICEF estimated that sanctions alone caused 500,000 child deaths over a decade, many of them linked to contaminated water and collapsed sanitation. Post-2003, reconstruction spending on water and electricity exceeded $15 billion. The results were inconsistent. Cities like Basra experienced repeated water crises. In 2018, over 100,000 people were hospitalized due to contaminated water supply. The infrastructure was rebuilt, but not rebuilt well. And the next conflict, the ISIS campaign of 2014 to 2017, destroyed much of what had been restored. ISIS deliberately contaminated water sources ahead of its retreat. It destroyed dams, pumping stations, and treatment facilities across northern Iraq. The Mosul Dam, whose failure would have flooded downstream cities, was seized and held for months. The economic cost of water infrastructure damage during the ISIS period alone runs into billions of dollars. The final calculation. Water is the cheapest target and the most expensive to restore. The asymmetry ratio, cost of destruction versus cost of rebuilding, runs from 125 to 100 or higher, depending on the target. The biological consequences multiply the economic damage by an order of magnitude beyond what the physical destruction alone would produce. Yemen, 400% increase in water costs. 14.5 million people without safe water. Agriculture and food security in collapse. Gaza, 63% of water infrastructure damaged or destroyed. Population reduced to 3 liters per day. 83% GDP contraction. Iraq, decades of cumulative water infrastructure damage across multiple conflicts. Billions spent on reconstruction with inconsistent results. In each case, the pattern is identical. Water infrastructure is targeted, deliberately or as a consequence of broader strikes. The civilian population loses access. Disease spreads. Agriculture collapses. The economy follows. And reconstruction takes years longer than the destruction took. War does not just consume economies, it poisons the water they drink. Subscribe to What War Costs. The cheapest weapon is always the one that hits the supply chain no one can live without.